Lee Carr from Sigma UK. I've been in the tile industry for over 30 years. In the last 7 or 8 years now, I've been involved with large format tiling and all the aspects of doing it.
And joining Lee is Dave Rowley from ARDEX. Dave, please introduce yourself. I'm sure people know you already, but go on.
First of all, my name's Dave Rowley. I've been with the ARDEX group now for 32 years. I've been in the industry longer than that. Started off my apprenticeship, but more recently also part of working for the ARDEX group, I also get involved with the Tile Association, and more recently I'm actually the chairman of the training committee, so we're looking at apprenticeships, that type of side, and all aspects of the tile industry from a training perspective, and also a board member as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, so guys, it's a Q&A session, so please get involved, get your comments in on the chat box below you, and yeah, we'll try and get through your questions. We will try and speak up. We've been told we're a little bit quiet, so we will try and speak up for you guys. Do let us know if you can't hear us. We'll try and project our voices. So where we're going to start then. So large format tiling. So I don't know, how does large format tiling and tiles change over time?
Large format, years and years ago, large format would have been about 30 by 30. But now, as time goes by, the size has increased to 60 by 60, which was classed as large format. Now, the average tile is 1.2 by 1.2, and then upwards to 3.2 by 1.6. And it could get bigger, we never know. But that's what we class. When you go to that size, you now talk about slabs. So 1.2 is a large tile, and above that is we call it like as a slab work. So that's how they change over time, and all aspects of how you use this product and how you would actually install it has completely changed as well. So that's how it's changed over a bit of time.
I think important for us also about this is to understand the definitions, because large formats and large format panels, there is obviously some guidance within the standards itself. So as Lee pointed out, as before, a large format tile 30 odd years ago was a 300 by 300. Typically now what we classify as a ceramic tiles is when the length of the tile is less than 600 in one length. So if you're looking at a 600 by 300, that is no longer a ceramic tile, it's actually a large format. So anything less than 600 millimeters is classified as a ceramic tile, and that can be porcelain. If it is over 600 millimeters up to 1200 millimeters, then that is classified as a large format. And then when we start going above the 1200, this is when we start looking at a large format panel.
So that's the difference between a tile and a panel.
Well,
anything over 1200.
A panel is the length of tile.
Yeah.
You've also got to consider where you're looking at the thickness of tile as well. So to classify a tile is when it's 5.5 millimeters and thicker. If it is actually 5.5 and less, it's classified as a thin tile or a thin panel, depending on the size of the material.
And then lots of different considerations between the two, which I presume we will come on to later. Yeah. So let's take it all back and let's take it to the start. You're doing a large format tiling installation with tiles or panels. Where do we start then? Should we look at maybe background prep, start off with Dave? What are things you need to consider?
Well, obviously background prep is vital in tiling itself. Again, if you went back for anyone who's watching, I've been in the industry for a number of years. Tiles themselves were a lot smaller, and we did tend to build out and get the surface flatness with the material itself, to a certain extent, of course.
Yeah.
But also because of the smaller tiles, you can follow the reactivity of the tile itself because they're so small. But now with large format, which is typically what we fix on a day-to-day sort of basis, wall tiles, you look at 600 by 300 as a standard, is a large format. It is important that your background is flat. And in the classifications and the standards, it does state what people may have heard of things like SR1, which is surface regularity, and one is actually, there's different versions, there's 1, 2 and 3, but for tiling, SR1 is where you put a 2 metre straight edge across the surface, being a wall or a floor, internal or external, and it shouldn't be any more than plus or minus 3 millimetres. But realistically, that is still not that great. It should be better than that. And especially when we start going to the 1200s and bigger, which is now the definition is a large format panel. So you need to check on that. Now, to do that, there's a number of different ways. In modern sort of construction, certainly now, depending on the age of the property, if it's new build, we tend to work with board systems. And you've got to consider weight, which is another vital element compared to what we did in fixed tiles 20, 30 years ago. And this is the thing, as far as what we did then and what we do now, it's completely different. You've got to consider these considerations. So the types of boards that you should be using, and generally speaking, you should be looking at tile backer boards, and that could be boards like bow board. It could also be XPS boards like Weddy. And obviously board system in general that actually gives you that flat surface, but also provide the weight aspect as well. Also, you've got to consider things like primers. We generally, in the industry, we tend to prime things anyway, but obviously the crux of it, why we prime, is obviously to take some of that suction out of the background, and that actually increases the open time of your tile adhesives, especially when you're fixing bigger, larger format tiles.
You need that open time, don't you?
You do, and also we're not just talking about wall application, floors as well. You want to put things like compounds, again, board systems. You've got to consider all those factors as well. But also you've got to consider the use as well of the weight bearing on the floor. Can it support what's going to be trafficked on that? And the tile type itself is vitally important in the design aspect, because if the tile itself or the panel that you're using isn't suitable for the environment, then you've also got to be considering for slip resistance. If it's a floor, can it be used in that general type of environment? Hygiene areas, wet rooms, you need to consider things like tanking systems and that type of thing as well.
Fantastic. So you've got your prep. Sorry, Lee, go on.
You've also got to consider where it goes as well. Because a lot of these where they design and they put panel large format tiles, you've got to make sure you've got you can get into the area itself straight away. You've got to make sure that the tile will fit through the door, because these tiles can be a large, we'll talk about large format, 2.4 by 1.2. If you've got a return and you kind of get into the building, or you've got windows and you've got reveals and you don't get a full tile in, you've got to look at that design as well, because if it has every tile's cut, it just defeats the object. You want to make sure that you actually display the tiles to its full potential at full size as well. So you've got to consider that as well.
So you've done your preparation, you've done your background, everything's ready. What do we need to consider then after that?
Well, you also, really just touching on a bit further with what Lee said, as far as you say, you've got to think about the design as far as the size of tile. It might be that the customer wants a large format panel, but it may not be doable. But also you've got to consider, if you start cutting things down, there's going to be a huge amount of waste. And it's always been the case, the bigger the tile, the more wastage you've got to actually put on the job. So the customer needs to be aware that it may be a small room, but in actual fact, the smaller the room, the more wastage you actually have.
Because there's more cuts, presumably,
You can get these tiles can be 3.2 by 1.6, and you've got a 2.4 metre high room. You want to look at something like a 2.6 tile. So you've got to consider, they're still large, but you've got to consider dropping the size down slightly. You've still got to do the same sort of techniques with a large format, but the huge ones, if somebody offers you a 3.6 and your room's 2.4, you're wasting so much. So you drop the size down to where you've got to consider the size of actual where area you're actually putting it into. So
and does the size of the tile affect sort of the transportation issues as well, and the handling of the tiles?
Most of the large format, when I talk about large format, David's talking about like over 1.2. The large format we're certainly considering is like 2.4 and larger, which we always recommend is a carry frame. It's a lifting frame. This is just for transportation, because the tiles have got a little bit of tolerance in where you can, they do have a little bit of bending, which is needed all the time. But you can go over that, without even noticing. So the bend can be a little bit more than its tolerance is, and you can get stress fractures in. And you don't really realise your stress fracture until you start cutting them, or you start putting them onto the walls and laying on the floor. Then the stress fractures come out. See, the main thing is you need a lifting frame. Everybody has that different ideas. You see them on the internet. All these people with just a single suction cup, they put it on the wall. It's perfect, but you don't see after the adhesive dry. You don't see if there's any problems afterwards. You just see the perfect scenario where they pick it up, put it on perfect.
Yeah. Because you do see, not going to name names or anything, but you do see a lot of people putting the suction cups in and trying to just lifting these big tiles with the suction cups. Yeah. What are the issues you're going to have around that?
You're going to have stress fractures. Because I mean, if you're carrying upstairs or you're going around corners, it just takes one person to go one way and one person to go the other way. If you haven't got the frame on the actual tile to give it a little bit of structure, you can actually bend it out of its tolerances. You might not see it. But if you're cutting this tail and there's a stress fracture there, and you cut the tail, it will go to the weakest point. So you need it. We developed a system where it is the ideal way of laying these tiles, ideal way of transporting these tiles, ideal way of doing everything perfectly. We know people don't do that, but this is the system we developed to make sure that this never happens. We understand people have got a little way of shortcutting, but we recommend this way. We recommend, and it's the only way we'd recommend. Because we're working with tiles which are expensive.
Yeah.
They're not 6x6 weight. They're actually expensive tiles. So you want to make 100% sure that this is going to work every time. So that's the system we developed, and that's the lifting frame that we'd recommend for transportation.
Yep. Go on, Dave.
I was just going to say, as far as we talk about obviously lifting materials, and generally speaking, when we talk about panels. I mentioned about the definition about tiles that could be less than 5.5, which is classified as a thin tile, or in a lot of cases, in large format terms, a thin panel. Obviously, considerations in the design aspect as well. It's always important to make sure that the tile not just is it suitable for the environment, is also make sure that it can actually is a thickness suitable for floors. The thinner the tile, it's common sense that there's actually more chance of fracturing and that type of thing as well, because ultimately we all know that we should be solid fixing. If there's any points that are missing with a thin tile on the floor, there's more obviously risk of fractures there as well. And also consider when you start going to thinner panels, there is also a case where sometimes certain tiles have got like a mesh on the back. And this doesn't apply just to large format panels. If you think about any mesh material, and this is exactly the same with things like mosaics, as well as anything that's on the back. At the end of the day, you've got to make sure that a mesh on the back, what has it been stuck with? Is the mesh actually, will it break down with a cement type of material? These are all factors. Because it's got a mesh in the back, it doesn't necessarily mean one might be good, one might not be.
So what do you recommend? You come across a tile. Interesting, we've just had a question in from Steve Waggy, talking about these mesh back tiles. If you come across a mesh back, resin-backed tile, what would you recommend?
The key thing is to, first of all, check with the manufacturer first that, one, it is actually suitable for the given area, so it would be a floor, as well, if it can be used, or it be for a wall only. With mesh itself, all I can say to any of you there listening is not one is the same as another. So keep in mind that do you, like we do with mosaics, check first. So if you can, put some water on the back, see if the glue behind breaks down. We also, within the standards, and this applies to all mesh materials, it includes mosaics, and this includes thin panels as well, is the mesh should not cover any more than 25% of the surface area. If it's higher than that, all I will say to all of you is don't fix them, because then you're going against the standards. And also, if you think about it, it's logical in the sense that if there's more glue on the back, the adhesive is now only sticking to the glue, not to the actual tile itself or the material that you're fixing. So just be mindful, wary.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, in case-by-case situations, we do test ourselves, but we can't test every single tile. You've got to look at it on a case-by-case basis, but get manufacturers involved and just check with them first, because they would have done these sort of tests
Yep.
as well.
So you've got your. Is there anything else we need to think about when design? So consideration like movement joints or perimeter joints when working with these sort of tiles.
Movement joints is another element, and also joint widths are obviously important. Again, with regards to joint widths of tiles in the standards itself. So if we reiterate what I discussed earlier, anything less than 600 millimetres and less is classified as a tile. On a wall, then you should be looking at a minimum joint of 2 mil. It's not even a mil anymore, it's 2 mil. And on a floor, it would be 3. Okay. When you start going over 600 millimetres in length, then you should be increasing that on a wall at 3 mil. On floors, it still would be 3.
Because you do get a lot, Lee, of people asking, I want seamless floors.
Yes, there's a lot.
And then butt joint in, and you're going to get some issues around that, and you're going to have problems, are you, with the tile then? If you,
it's the background again, the expansion contraction of the background. The tiles may not expand the contract as much as you think, but the background, the substrate, maybe you might expand the contract. So as I said, David's got a bit of standards. There's a bit of standards for a reason. A lot of people are really going less than it, but the bit of standards are there for a reason to compensate for this.
It is. I mean, the thing is, again, tiles are a lot smaller, there's more joints. And what joints do, they obviously provide that design element, but also they do give some resistance for some lateral movement. They're not expansion joints, but they will give some lateral movement, because a grout is slightly weaker than the tile itself. So it will provide some movement there, properties.
you've got to consider expansion joints as well then with these sort of tiles.
You have. But also just be mindful about when you go over into a large format panel. This is where over 1200 in size, you should now be looking at over 3 mil. So on walls and floors, you should be looking at 4 mil. And when you start getting to the 3 metre, 2.5, 3 metre sort of panels, then it should be 5 mil. These are in the standards. I mean, end of the day, we don't know how much movement is going to take place. But with regards to movement joints, they would still follow the same codes of practice we do with tiling in general. So around the perimeters of a floor, your internal corners, again, in walls where the are very long, because large format panels, we're not talking generally small dwellings, they're quite big.
Yeah.
So you should be looking at movement joints in walls at 3 to 4.5 metres in both horizontal and vertical. And on floors, again, you should be looking at 8 to 10 square metres in non-heated areas. And obviously, you're looking at your 40-metre bay areas with regards to underfloor heating. We'll come on to uncoupling systems in a moment. But also important as well is you've got to follow the design of the build. So there's actually expansion materials in the actual substrate, be the wall and floor. They should be followed.
Got to follow them through.
To the actual tile finish, being a large format or a panel. And if there's two different substrates that are obviously meeting, then there again you should actually follow that through as well.
So you touched on it. So let's go to that then. Uncoupling systems, large format. Is that a must?
Well, as far as where it comes to heat, and rightly so, the industry now is now moving towards underfloor heating. So with regards to any heated systems that you are down, therefore you should be putting an uncoupling mat system. And obviously it should, with regards to stone, it should be as well. But with regards to large format panels and that type of thing, it's not essential that you need to use an uncoupling mat system in a non-heated area, though I will say it actually, because of the actual surface area so big, and you've got, and obviously with new screeds, if you talk about new build, there's going to be shrinkage in the base as it's drying and it continues to move. An uncoupler will relieve the actual...
Take out those stresses.
Take the lateral movement. Obviously, with regards to preparation, you should always make sure it's
Yeah.
dimension stable for both walls and floors
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. So you've got your design, everything is sorted with your movement joints. You've got your large format tiles. How do we go about cutting them then, Lee? Because you don't want to break one of these tiles, because these bad boys cost a lot of money.
Yeah, it costs a lot of money. And they're scary. You've got to start with, like, you've got to get them into place, but you've got to make sure that they're delivered properly. You've got to make sure that you've checked the tiles when they're getting delivered, because you don't want any stress fracture. You know, if they're being taken off apart, they're just lying at the bottom of a wagon, you've got to really consider, have they been bounced around and things. So you've got to start with how they're being delivered. Then you've got to lift and frame to get them into position to where you want them to. Preferably, you let you get them climatised into where you're working, but sometimes that's not you can't get that done.
So how long should you be leaving them to acclimatise then?
Just acclimatise.
It's like saying don't leave them outdoors for age and suddenly bring them in.
If you leave them outdoors in the frost, and you should be trying to preferably get them inside, acclimatise to where you are. And that's where you start them. Then you start cleaning the tiles to make sure they're clean. Lift them out of a solid. We do like the tables. You've got to lift them out of the tables. A lot of people try to make their own tables, but there's a lot of play in the tables. You've got to make sure the surface that you put on them is solid enough to take the weight of the tiles, because they are. Some of them are like 27 upwards kilograms per. So they're getting heavier. The ones you worked the other day were 52 kilograms. So you've got to make sure the surface that you put on them can take the weight. There's no much bending. Then you start with it. You can do it two ways. You can do the score and snap system, which is like a rail system with a tungsten carbide blade. So it's a little bit like a tile cutter, but on a real system. We can go up to 3.2, 3.6. We can actually make these longer or shorter than I think. So like a tungsten carbide, and what we do is scribe and we put a bolt in the actual tile, just like a normal tile, and then you just get a separator, which is an individual tool that actually puts the pressure on the actual tile itself, and you weaken each end first. So you click one end, you have a small click, then you go to the other end and then a small click. But the same system is, sometimes you cannot do these where you need an angle grinder or like a blade to cut through to give it a bit more cleaner finish. We do a system we call a Keraflex, which you put on the same rail system and use an angle grinder with like a continuous blade to get it clean.
Right, I see,
wet or dry. She's doing this wet or dry. So there's two ways of doing it. But and then you're looking into cutting corners and niches and all that. You have to take the tension out of the tiles. So you have to drill. If you're cutting in area, you have to drill the corners to make any size of hole. The larger the hole, the less tension there is in that corner. All you're doing is stop and getting like a pinch point where they're 90 degrees. So when you're cutting through it, they haven't got one where it just spreads disappears the tension out the tile. So you drill all four corners, see on the niche, and then you cut the tile a certain way. There's a couple of ways of doing it. If you don't need the actual tile inside, you can cut it from corner to corner. If you do need to go cut around and everything, but you always have to drill the corners or the niches to make sure there's no.
Because if you don't do that, you're going to cut cracks in the corner, and it's going to.
You've got 1 point for the feel where the curvature takes that 1 point out. Preferably, well, even large format tiles. I'm not talking about slabs. If you can, especially in doorways and everything, the 12 and the 12 you should be working under the architrave and under the skirting board, all the skirting boards. So you should leave that arc in if you preferably can on large format tiles. So because we find that we've had a lot of people after a couple of months they're cracking.
Oh, right.
So either the joiners put the wood too tight to the actual tile, or there's a little bit like that points there. So if you can leave that curvature in, especially on floors, because you have got pressure on there, you should leave the curvature in. But on walls, it's not as much, because you want to be doing niches with a 90 degree corners and everything. So that's how you should be cutting the tiles. There are a couple of ways of doing it. So and just keep your fingers crossed when you do it.
Yeah, definitely, ones, definitely. So we've cut our tiles. What do we need to think about then? Presumably, we're going on to sort of adhesive selection and that sort of thing. And what sort of do we need to think about then?
Well, as far as adhesive side, obviously, with any sort of large format tile, and that includes panels as well, it should be solid bed fixed. Doesn't matter if it's wall or floor. Obviously, the method with regards to solid bed fixing, this really is going to be really down to the individual material at the time, because ultimately what you should do is you should comb your adhesive to the wall, and also to the back of the tile. The notch trowel that you put on the back of the tile or panel should be smaller than the notch that you're putting on the wall. It shouldn't be the same notch trowel. Okay. This will obviously aid in the collapsing of the ribs. Some people also skim the back of the tile or panel to take out the notches itself, which is fine as well. It's down to personal preference, but ultimately the installer should actually be getting some fixing. Why I say the trowel notch size will be dependent. So it could be 8mm on the wall. It could be a 4mm on the back of the panel, but ultimately the panels that you're installing, depending on where they've come in the world, all of them have got different tolerances. There is some panels themselves that they have up to 2mm tolerance. Now, if you take 2mm tolerance that way or that way, and then take consideration your background, which has also got a tolerance, you're talking, it could be quite a substantial thickness that you need to build out. So the notch trowel will be dependent on the individual job, but also you should also remove a tile, which I know is very difficult.
I was going to say, you've got a massive tile. Do you want to be removing that, looking behind it, or?
But it's important to at least make sure that when you install them, you are getting that sort of fixes. So, I mean, with smaller tiles or larger tiles, so 600 to 1200, you should be pulling them off periodically to check that you're getting the coverage. A little bit more difficult panels, so you have to look on case by case, but that's through you checking your prep, checking the towel, make sure it's straight. If there is any undulations, consider a thicker notch trowel. Make sure that when you spread the adhesive on the wall and on the back of the tile itself, you spread it in the shortest direction. So, for example, if it is 3 meters high, the notches should go in the opposite direction. So you're spreading in the shortest distance of the towel. This helps with the aid of collapsing the ribs as well. And also you've got to consider, because when we talk about panels, again, we're not talking domestic situations in most cases, but essentially if they're using tiles that are bigger panels and you're fixing over 3 meters in height, then you also need to consider mechanical fixing. And that doesn't apply to just panels. That is in the standards for any tiling. Anything over 3 meters in height, you need to consider mechanical fixing. Depending upon the mechanical fixings that you're using, you may also need to consider on the bed thickness of the actual material put behind. And as long as the material itself is suitable to cope with the thickness. Now, within the range, within ARDEX, we would be recommending on a wall, we would recommend the ARDEX X77. A lot of that is also because the fact that it's creamy but also wet material. So when you are positioning the panels or tiles into place, it will help to physically collapse and you get the connection of the notches being collapsed behind the tile itself.
Yeah, because we had a question from Paul in Ireland asking about, is rapid set better for large format?
Rapid setting is better, yes, and that's what I said about priming backgrounds before with like ARDEX P51 primer to increase the open time so you can spread more and install your tiles. But rapid setting products are better because there's less water behind, so therefore it can actually help with hydrated.
But you do want a rapid set. You want a rapid set with a long open time, though, don't you?
Yeah.
So.
And then in fairness, but also the ARDEX range you've got rapid drying products, so they actually physically take the water within the material itself and not relying just on air drying.
Is it different on the floor then, Dave? Could you use a semi-rapid or a standard setting or a PTB?
Floors, I would, like we have done, and we're not doing anything different here. With anything large format, it's aging itself. We've had these products for 30 years, but we recommended something like the ARDEX 325 PTB. We have got other products within the ARDEX range which are suitable for large format tiles, or you can have semi-rapids, which we have the Bal XL floor one as well. But these are obviously helping to aid in getting that contact as well. But it's making sure that the adhesive itself, if there is, normally with adhesives, if there's 2 water ratios, I would always, if you're fixing panels, go for the floor ratio on the wall, because that helps with actually, as you position the panel in place and let it slide into place, those ribs will actually help to collapse as you're putting it into position. But these are sort of...
But speak to your adhesive manufacturer.
Keep speak to us, and we would obviously advise on a case-by-case basis, because there's so much to consider. It's sometimes just having a little chat with us first, and we have obviously a team of trained technical managers. Lee is on hand as well. The thing is, sometimes you've got to look on a design aspect, and there may be something that you may not have thought about that needs to be, and we want to make sure that we don't want any problems going forward.
As David said, but if it's letting the tail slide down, you might not have that room. You might not have that room to let the tail slide down, so you've got to make sure they collapse properly.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure when you do take the air, you've got to make sure everything collapses properly. We do recommend a no air trowel because it has large notches, small notches, large notches, so it just helps a little bit more to collapse in a little bit more. Because the square notches, if they collapse in together, you may just have a little bit of air trapped inside. So that's where we recommend the larger, small notches like a no air trowel. On the wall itself.
Again, as it says, it's depending upon the bed thickness you're looking at. I mean, there's some notches that are on a slight angle. At the end of the day, it's about making sure that you get solid bed fixing, and the bed thickness is vital depending on the background.
What about engaging the wall first before you trowel your ribs out? Because I've seen that quite a lot. I know it's quite common in America, isn't it? People to engage the wall first and back of the trowel, so almost back buttering the wall before you. Is that? Would you recommend that, Dave? Or
I mean, ultimately, essentially, the adhesive doesn't pick and choose which you want to stick to. It's about getting solid bed fixing. So, it's a really sort of on personal preference. It's about physically looking at the state of that project at the time, both flatness, tolerances of the panels themselves, and tolerance of the background, but also the notch size. But as long as you engage both the background and tile, which method you want to, if you want to, but I mean, in the standards, it doesn't say trowel on the wall and back butt to the back of the tile. So you still trowel, but you skim out and you're getting the contact. So you butt to the back, you trowel the wall. But really, obviously, down to personal preference. Ultimately, if you take it off and you're getting good contact evenly to both the substrate and the tile, the panel, then you've done what is necessary to do.
What I've been seeing when I've been going around is actually the back butt of the tail, but put the back butt and then the trowel it out with the 4mm trowel. So they'll actually back butt the actual adhesive on, then they'll trowel it out with the 4mm, so that it's literally back butt and then troweling over the top. So just that's what they're doing on the back of the tails, especially on the mesh-backed.
Well, it is, but also just another point I just thought about is, again, tiles are not always flat. No. So if you've got any sort of
bowing or anything like that,
profiles on the back of the tile, you must always pre-fill them as well. Don't just put the knot straight on there. Again, you want to get solid by fixing, but consider those elements and also calculation of material you're going to be using.
Oh, another thing I've just come into my head is making sure the back of the tile is clean. So because you can, do you get like wax or dust or anything on the back when transportation, that sort of thing you have to think about?
Everything just needs to be clean. But the area you're working in is going to be dusty, so you clean the front and the back, just because nothing sticks to dust. So we always stay clean the front and the back to make sure that before you do your adhesive, just a quick wipe down, make sure there's nothing or no like contaminants, and even at the front as well, make sure there's no contaminants. So you just got to keep at it all the time to make sure that
And also that is a good point is even when you're cutting the tiles. So once you've cut the actual tiles, you've obviously created dust. It needs to be wiped down.
So you put the tile on the frame and your back butters. So when it's on the frame, on the lifting frame, and it's on an A-frame, you have a chance to look at the back of the tile and actually clean the back of the tile. So you're not trying to tip it over on the table. You've actually got it on an A-frame and just clean the back of the tile, and then you just do your adhesive the way you want to do your
back
adhesive.
Back your adhesive and then
back butt and then trowel it back in, so it's got your notches as well. So the short way is usual.
I mean, generally speaking, as far as fixing areas, it depends on the product using. Obviously, we've got good open tiles within the ARDEX range, but essentially when you're fixing big panels, 3 meters and that sort of thing, then you generally would spread, to do the one panel and do it stage by stage so that you're making sure you've got your lines.
Do you recommend wall first and tile second?
Sorry?
Would you recommend the wall first or tile second?
Yeah. Okay. But also, as far as when we talk about joint widths as well, and again, this doesn't apply, again, just to panels or large format tiles. Obviously, we talked about joint widths itself, but when using spacers, it is actually important also. I know this, you get spacer crosses and things like that, but essentially, any crosses or any spaces you put into the project, the joints themselves, must always be pulled back out. You should never grout over any tile spacers. And that applies with any fixing as well.
Excellent. Well, let's go some questions then. So we've got a question from Paul, again in Ireland, talking about bay sizes, expansion for external large format, 60 by 60 on patios, etc. So external, anything you need to consider?
External tiling, again, you should be looking at this where it changes slightly to what I discussed earlier on expansion joints. External tiling, because it is more popular now, therefore you should be looking at 3 metre areas, 3 metre bay areas. And that essentially, if you're using tiles that are lighter in colour. Darker colour tiles, as you can appreciate, heat actually sits within the tile itself and retains the heat for a lot longer than a lighter tile. So therefore you should be considering, Paul and everybody else, that you should be looking at 2.5 metre bay areas with darker coloured tiles. So 3 metres for lighter and 2.5 for darker.
Excellent. If you haven't got any more questions, guys, please get them in and we'll try and answer them. So do you need any special considerations then after we've fixed the tiles? Do we need to think about anything there? Oh, something came into my head just then. What about leveling systems and leveling clips with large formats? Anything you need to consider there? Are they okay to use on the floor? And
ultimately, the leveling clips and that sort are fine if they are used in the right intentions. You see a lot things whereby people are using leveling clips for building up. Ultimately, it goes back to what I said before, the preparation. You need to make sure your backgrounds are flat. And if anything, doing that, it will save so much more time and that type of thing. But the idea is, because of the fact is, as I said earlier, depending on where the panels are coming in, around the world, they all have different tolerances, and it can be up to 2 mil, which is actually a lot if you consider. The clips themselves will actually allow level clips to actually help to actually provide that flat surface. But also you've got to consider in design, and it's things like this. When you're working on sites, you're not normally always working in the lighting that it's going to be eventually what it's going to look like. So you've got things like down lighting and things like that. Where possible, if you can get the lighting in the room, what's going to be the lighting once it's been installed, it's better because you can see if there's any sort of lipping and that type of thing. But essentially, you want to ensure that if you brick bond, that always seek advice from the manufacturer as to what the actual half bonding or quarter bonding or.
And is that down how you lay that tile? Is that down to the tile manufacturer, or is it personal choice that when you come about laying these large?
The leveling clips, yeah, they should. Leveling clips are to take the last little bit out. They're not there. They're not there to tailor the floor. They should be all tailored. Should be able to tailor the floor. The leveling clips are just to take out that little bit extra, that small little bit extra that maybe you can't see. That's what they're there for. They're not
small, very
tight.
minor deviations.
So
we're not talking.
On a large slab, you want it perfectly level. So you put about 6 or 7 or 8 up the side, and it's just to take that little bit away, not to keep on pumping away until it moves the tail 3 or 4 millimeters. That's not what they're there for. They should be called finishing clips, really. We call them leveling clips. It should just to finish that little bit extra off, so you've got a perfect floor. I'd say with downlighters, if you leave a little bit of a lip and a down, and you haven't got downlighters on, and somebody fits a downlighter, you're going to see that shades straight away. That's just to take that little bit out. It's not leveling clips. Yes, they're good, but they shouldn't be pumped. They should be finishing.
Used in intended use.
Yes. Because you should be a tailor.
Yeah.
They're not for.
What are the dangers then if you if you use it?
Well, ultimately, is the fact that you can get issues where you have voids underneath. But essentially, especially with thinner panels and that type of thing as well, you're going to put fractures in. The whole purpose is the fact
I'm not going to be able to cope with that strain you put on them.
Correct.
Yeah, fantastic. We've got a question from Saba Bogdan's asking about standard setting adhesives in the ARDEX range for large format slabs. Dave, is that?
With regards to, we recommend the X77, that's the only one we would recommend with the large format panels, but that's, again, it's a standard setting.
That's a standard, it is a standard setting, isn't it?
It's a high yield adhesive, but it's actually designed, it can actually be used in those type of size panels. Yeah.
Fantastic. Anything else, guys? I think, you know, coming to the end of our session today. I think that's all the questions being asked. I don't know if you guys got anything else that you know think we need to touch on before we leave.
I mean, as far as the only key thing is obviously grouts and that type of thing. Obviously, very much you use the FS or the FL grout depending on the width of the actual joints and really the nature of if you want a smooth or a more coarser type of grout. Obviously, you've got epoxies, which is the EG18 plus, which obviously again down to the intention of the environment and what it's being used for. But one of the key things as well is the cleaning regime afterwards as well. Always seek advice that type of thing. But generally speaking, for cleaning of large format panels and tiles, that's is normally a mild alkaline cleaner, but always check with the manufacturer if it's more ribbon or non-slip tile, they may need to consider other type of cleaners as well.
Brilliant, fantastic. But before we go, just like to mention to everybody that hang on, one question from Paul. We got in there just in time. Quick question: what about tile over tile with large format panels and tiles? Would you recommend that?
Yeah. You can tail over tail on the brick. You've got to make sure that the tails are secured properly, and actually the guy who's done the tailing beforehand has made it flat, so you've got to have the tolerances there. So if it's a beveled tail, you can't be, because there's over the tolerance, but you can do. But if you'd be looking at the lighter weight tails, like the 5.5 and less, which would be the 3 mil ones, and then you're talking about mesh backs again. So as I say, it's the design part of it, but preferably you want to strip it back to nothing and put the boards onto the walls because of the weight wise, back to boards. And when you do back to boards, all these backer boards on the walls, you can actually set your own tolerances. So it's not a plasterer doing it, it's actually something you can do it yourself. So yes, you can, but we recommend to go back to the wall itself and start putting your boards on yourself, and you can sort your tolerances out then. So you're not relying on, say, Joe Bloggs.
The one who done it before, he's got it all right.
The guy behind you always gets the blame, but if you do it yourself, it's much more.
The guy behind that. How many layers are you going to go back?
So,
Well, yes, yeah.
And as I say,
we've all seen it.
Every bathroom should not have plasterboard, and I know it's plasterboard. You should be going to back. The technology's there now that we should be using it. Builders should be using it now, rather than putting plasterboards and everybody having to put boards on top of plasterboards or taking the plasterboards off. They should be used now. So, like as you say, your ball board and other stuff like wedding and stuff like that.
I mean, ultimately, it's tile on tile. It's a fantastic service tile, providing it's sound and solid. But the key thing is the weight, and that is ultimately the issue. If we're looking at plaster and plasterboard, when you've got tiles, you're ready on the borderline on plasterboard. On plaster, it's got to be ripped off. But essentially, if it's tile on tile and it's within the weight limits, you can do that by P4 primer and actually go on with your adhesive, so that we have a primer that goes down onto tile on tile.
Steve's asked Mitring thumbs up. I'm not sure what Steve means about that. I don't know if that's a question for you then, Lee.
Large format now. Large format now.
Everyone wants Mitring's
Everybody wants Mitring. It's large format. They want a seamless finish. So Mitring is the way forward for large format. You can't stick a trim on. You're looking at a huge, like a real beautiful tile, and you put a trim down the middle. Trims are for like the ceramic size of tiles. We think, personally think of. So you do that. You would do a Mitring 90%.
Do you have a tool to
with the Mitring machine. A lot of people would do the blades. You can do it by freehand. A lot of people do it freehand. We have got a jig. girls, the Jolly Pro, which is set at 46 degrees, and you can adjust the height for different types, different depths of tails. You run along, and then you've got after the Mitring, you're looking at polishing the edges. Just another thing on when you're cutting as well. If you're doing corners, it's always, we've been talking to a few manufacturers, cutting the corners or cutting the tail. When you've cut it, clean it back as smoothly as possible. So polishing pads, diamond polishing pads, laminate pads, just get it back to sort of like smooth as, because you don't want any imperfections in the tail itself. Just try to get rid of the
safety aspect.
Just get back to try and make sure these tails are strong. So if you've got little bumps and lumps, you just clean them back to it as smooth as you possibly can, just to give it a bit more back to where it was manufactured, because it takes away all the little imperfections and gets it back to where it was. Because I learned that from a tailor the other day, from a tail manufacturer the other day, who told me, yeah, clean it back as smoothly as possible. It just helps the tail give more strength back into the tail itself. So yes,
I suppose they're little weak points, are they? In the tail,
every time you cut into the tail, you're weak into the tail. But
yeah,
these as you see, as you drill them out, once they're on the walls, most people mate off the wall, so you mate the tail off the wall and put it back on. So yeah, we have a Jolly Pro for that, and we have the blades for it, and we have the laminate pads for it. And it's just, and we always see these large format tails. It's bringing the professionalism back to tailing. Not everybody can do it. It's a you've got to be a tradesman, a proper tailor to do this stuff.
Yeah. So would you recommend really getting some really good going on a good training course?
It's difficult because we're trying to get away from the I can do it for £5 less type of person. This isn't that type of job.
This is high end stuff, isn't it?
This isn't your 40 meters a day. I'll slap it down in one day. This is bringing tailing back to proper tailors and not the general aspects of everybody. It's a proper professional job you have to be.
And that leads us nicely into training and what Sigma and what ARDEX can provide training-wise then for these sort of systems.
We've actually got a training course that we're doing together in collaboration with Weddy at their premises in Manchester in May. That's actually now fully booked. We're actually oversubscribed. There's about 30 people attending. And also the fact is, this is not just a one-off. We are going to be doing more of these events. So I would say to any of you, as Lee said earlier, it is different to traditional sort of tiling. Not just small tiles, but even large format is a step in its own right as well. But when you start moving to panels, you've got to look at the whole thing completely different again. So I would consider, as far as we have got courses available, if you go onto the ARDEX website, which is the ardexacademy.uk, and you can actually, we will be putting some new dates out there in collaboration with Sigma and Weddy, and really this doesn't start just this year, this is ongoingly, as well as other courses, because we've got, there's so much we could talk about. I know we've only got a short time, but things like moisture control, whether you've got big format tiles, alter properties, you're not just looking at a background being flat now, you've got to consider other factors, and the design, which is why I said earlier, always just give either of us a call, we can point you in the direction, because there may be things that what you do on that job is not necessarily the same on that one.
What I would say, guys, I know Dave has said that the course it has subscribed in May with Weddy and Sigma, but like we will be putting on courses later in the year. So if you are interested, please drop us a line, go on the website, pop us an email, give us a call saying, look, I'm interested in going on this piece, put my name down, and we'll get your name down. And when we get to have those other dates put in the diary, we will let you know and get you booked on
and that course. And if anybody's actually interested, also, if you're not aware, we have actually had a GivBax reward scheme for ARDEX that we started late last year. If you're not aware about GivBax rewards, if you download the app on the App Store or Google and go on to GivBax rewards and sign up on there, you can actually start earning points which actually turn into cash, which you can actually just get the cash from your local ATM. That's pinless.
Yeah, anytime you buy an ARDEX or BAL product, sign up, scan the receipt, and you get points for everything you purchase, wherever you buy it.
If you've
Wherever
got any
you buy it.
questions, contact one of the ARDEX representatives or an office, and we can obviously just guide you as to for that further information.
So just quickly then touching on technical support, Lee, what sort of technical support can Sigma give out on the road then?
Yeah, we can call us anytime we want. Anybody wants any help, we do on-site visits, as we do the training with yourselves and other people. But if you need to go on site, we will come on site and help you out. We're only at the end of the phone, so anything you need from us, we're always there.
And from an ARDEX point of view, Dave, just remind people.
ARDEX, obviously, I cover the northwest, but there's actually 9 of us all around the UK. So we have small geographic areas. Therefore, we're obviously on hand. We can support you locally, and we can do everything from, as likewise with Lee, we can do site visits. We can obviously pick up the phone and we can give technical advice. We can also provide things like moisture testing, because again, we're not talking about just new builds, we're also looking at traditional old builds as well, and these have consequences as to what you need to prepare first, as well as obviously do on-site recommendations, which obviously supports it with the ARDEX guarantees as well, group guarantees.
Fantastic. So I'd just like to thank you to Lee from Sigma and from Dave from ARDEX. And thank you for all you guys who've been watching and asking your questions. So if you've got any other questions you think of after the time, do put them in the comments and we'll come back to you and give you an answer on that, or you can just give us a call. So thanks a lot, and thanks for joining us tonight. And have a great evening, guys. Thanks a lot.